Welcome everybody to the live stream. This is the first one of these that we're doing. You might have tuned in and seen the podcast before, but this is the first Go Green 2026 live stream we're doing. And if folks don't know who we are, my name is Andy Ellis, and I am running for governor as a Green Party candidate. And I am excited to have this show as an opportunity to talk with you all about what we're doing, what's happening in the news, and all of that. Owen, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, Owen Silverman Andrews here, Andy's running mate, Lieutenant Governor, Green candidate 2026. Let's go.
Excellent. Yeah, so what I think we're going to try to do, so first of all, let me just say, this is the first time we're doing this live. Anything we've done before has been recorded and then we put it out and things like that. So we're trying out a new concept here where we're going to try to make it live. We're going to try to make it interactive. We're going to try to make it responsive to people. So give us feedback. We will definitely appreciate it, as we go through this. One thing somebody asked me earlier today, and this is my friend, Mr. Wendell. You will meet him a lot. He likes to be on camera. And so, there he is. He likes to come in and be part of these things. And, I used to try to not have the cats in the camera, but everybody was like, people like cats more than they like you. So I'm more than happy to have this cat here.
Mr. Wendell for Prez.
Yeah, Mr. Wendell for president, for whatever, a lot of folks, a lot of the cats around here have considered political office at different points. So, somebody asked me earlier today, what's the difference between this live stream and the podcast? How does it all work? That type of thing. So the podcast is usually just me and one other person, and we do a really deep dive, long form, hour and a half type of thing where we get really deep into one issue or a book or an idea or something like that. And I think that's really great. We've had some really good content with that. We've gotten some really good people on board, and we're going to keep doing it as it seems fit. But this show is a little bit different. It is a weekly series. We're going to talk about Maryland politics. We're going to talk about movement issues, electoral strategy. We're going to give campaign updates. We're going to do more timely type of stuff and more quick fire type of stuff. Now, if you see anything tonight that you really like, and you think that is something that you would like to see us go deeper on, more than the 10 minutes we spend on it tonight, just let us know. You can always send info to ideas@gogreen2026.com. And that will get to us, and that will be a way that we can be able to check in and, see the feedback from folks and see how things are working. I think that the other piece about this is that we want to take questions actively. So we have a few questions that have already come in before tonight's show that we're excited that we're going to answer toward the end of the show. But we also encourage folks to send us questions. So questions go to gogreen2026.com questions, and you'll be able to see, you'll be able to fill out a form and give us a question and let us know if you want us to answer it on the air or not. So that's a little bit of how the show works. Owen, did I cover everything there?
I think you got it.
Excellent. All right. So tonight's show, we are going to start off with a segment that we call Two Interesting Facts, and we're going to get into that first and just go through some stories that are in the news. I think this is a thing that we're going to do relatively regularly to highlight some things that caught our attention and that we'll probably be diving into more later. Then we're going to spend some time looking at the UMBC poll, which came out recently, and we had a good newsletter article that talked about our interpretation of what that looks like for us and what it means for folks. So after that, we're going to have an interview. We're going to have a guest on, Taylor Fraser McCollum, who is a Green, who is really active in the fight against data centers down there in Landover. She's going to come on and talk to us about about the struggle, about the path to victory, and see what we can learn about that. And then I think we're going to dive a little bit into some of the campaigns, Israel and Palestine policy. We just released something new today, so you all will get to be the first ones to get to see some of that stuff. So we're excited to have that coming out as well. And then we'll do some Q&A and some get some audience interaction going here. So with that, I think we're probably ready to dive into these to these interesting stories. What do you think?
Yeah, let's get it.
Okay, so I'm going to start with this one. So Governor Westmore signed an executive order this last week to chart the future of Maryland's horse industry. This one is fascinating to me because a couple weeks ago, Owen mentioned this idea to me about the importance that horse racing was going to have in the 2026 election. I was not quite sure of it, but the more we've talked about it, the more I really realized that it's going to be one of those kind of defining issues that separates who we are from who they are. And so, like I said, on November 7th, Westmore signed the Maryland Horse Industry Strategic Plan Executive Order. And what it requires is a plan for the horse industry to be presented to the governor at the end of 2026 and to the General Assembly in 2027. And it sort of nostalgically tries to keep the failing horse racing business central to the larger horse economy in Maryland, even though most of the horse business these days is not actually involved in racing at all. Things like recreational farm and other means of horse raising are doing a lot more business, are a lot more successful, but they are basically now going to be asked by the governor and the special task force of industry insiders and government leaders that he's put together in order to help keep the horse racing industry afloat. And it's really fascinating the degree to once you start understanding how much this administration loves horse racing and the money that comes from people in horse racing, you start to see that this is actually like a major issue for them. It's not, Maryland is a horse state. It's a big issue for them. And I think it's a big issue for them, not because of the cultural impact that it has on Maryland, but because of the money that the people who bring in horses bring to the campaign. We'll get into that later. But for now, we need to understand that he signed this executive order. And I want to say this. Greens oppose animal exploitation for entertainment. It's in our platform. It has been for a long time. And we'll be developing out a policy that interacts with this more directly, that it interacts with the animal exploitation, but also addresses the economic reality of the question. But I want to say one last thing about this, too, before we get to some key facts about the horse racing industry in Maryland. This is part of a strategy that Governor Moore is using to put important decisions on the 2027 legislature. So what is going to happen right now is this commission will come back and it will make its report at the end of 2026, like September of 2026. So that Governor Moore can get up on a debate stage at some point, a debate stage that we hope we're on, by the way, and he can say, when this report comes in about the future of Maryland's horse racing industry, you are going to want a leader like me at the helm because we are going to have to make hard choices. So he is setting up things right now where the policy will have to be enacted in 2027 so that he has an argumentative tool to sort of be able to use in whatever election is coming up next in order to be able to say, if you vote for me, you'll get this kind of steady hand, middle of the road leadership. If you vote for anybody else, you're going to get some crazy alternatives. So just keep that in mind because it's going to be an issue that comes up more in the election. And as we close out this segment here, I wanted to share some key facts about Maryland's horse racing industry. 400 plus horses have been killed at Maryland racetracks since 2014. $95.2 million in fiscal year 2025 was a subsidy from the casino revenues that kept the horse racing industry afloat. It did things like make sure the purses were good enough at payout so that people would actually come to horse racing. That's $95.2 million that came from casino gambling that could have gone to any number of things. One of the things we've been talking a lot about in this campaign is that we want to double the budget for the Maryland library system. And you know what the budget for the Maryland library system was last year? It was $100 million. So sitting right there is $95 million that is subsidizing the horse racing industry that could be going into our libraries and having real meaningful and important impact. The last stat I want to give on this is that there's been a 66% decrease in attendance at Maryland's thoroughbred tracks from 2013 to 2022. This is a dying industry that is being subsidized by gambling profits, and the Democrats are trying to prop it up for the big donors who benefit from it and who have cultural attachment to it. We are going to take this issue on. We're going to develop a policy that it treats the horses like they need to be treated and treats the rest of the industry that is treating the horses well as a beneficial part of Maryland's economy, while we figure out how to undo the damage that Democrats have done to our economy and to those horses by getting rid of this subsidization of this industry. So that's it. That's my intro, my interesting story, and a key fact. We will definitely be delving into this more later. We're going to talk about horse racing quite a bit over the next couple of years, or the next couple of months, because we think Governor Moore is going to talk about it a lot in order to placate his donors. So, Owen, any feedback on this horse story?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, Andy, I don't think either of us got into this campaign thinking that horses would be such a central part of our policy investigations over the past few weeks. I think you mentioned that key part of our Green Party values against the exploitation of animals for entertainment or many other reasons. I think that we'll be guided by our values as we dig deeper into this policy issue. I think the other piece will be following the money. There's a lot of rich people who own horses, who race horses, and who, just as they have manipulated the tax code to protect their wealth and have found subsidies for their businesses, so too have they found subsidies and public monies for their pastimes, for their entertainment. And so working class folks don't go to the races the way they did when horse racing in Maryland and other states had a monopoly on legal gambling, right? That is what led to this being such a central part of the supposed culture of our state and other states, is that other forms of gambling were illegal, and horse racing and dog racing, for that matter, and boxing were in certain states, or in many states, legal. And increasingly, dog racing is now only in West Virginia, right? I don't think there are dog tracks in the other 49 states. There aren't dog racing tracks in Maryland anymore. And the same thing is happening in Maryland. There are fewer tracks because people, given a choice of where to gamble, choose not to bet on horses doing dangerous things and being hurt. So I think there are a lot of dynamics to this, but if we follow our values and we follow the money, we can see why, we can uncover why politicians at the very highest level of our state are propping up the horse racing industry. We can dig into what kind of development deals are going to go down by the Laurel track, by the Pimlico track, and make sure that neighbors in those communities have a say in the future of the development around those tracks, and that it's not the casinos and the big money players who are having their way behind closed doors.
Yep, you heard it here first. Horse racing is going to be a big part of the 2026 election. And I want to say, before we transition to your interesting fact, this is a thing that came to us from a conversation that you sort of randomly got looped into. And somebody brought this issue up to Owen, and we did our research and we did our due diligence, and we realized this was a good issue for us to be value aligned on, but also for the politics that we have to challenge the politics that they have, for the donors we have to be able to stand up to the donors they have. And so I think this is an issue that I think models the kind of politics we want to take forward. If somebody has an issue they think is important and they think that we'd like to hear about, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear it, and you might end up on one of these interesting stories. So with that, I want to transition to you, Owen, for your interesting story. And I'm going to go ahead and move this slide forward so we can look at these two articles.
Sure. So there was a really important article that came out in the website Truth Out, and by a neighbor of mine, actually, Jess Lenore. And this article, just as Andy's interesting article and interesting fact related to the way in which the state of Maryland and Maryland politicians are profiting or propping up the horse racing industry, and that is a surprise to many of us. Many of us may also be surprised to learn that the retirement fund of the public employees of the state of Maryland, which is controlled by an appointee of the legislature, the treasurer, and the controller, a statewide elected official, as well as appointees of the governor and appointees of two of the institutional state affiliate unions is investing to the tune of tens of millions of dollars in Israel bonds at a time when Israel was engaged in some of the most atrocious genocidal acts and ethnic cleansing of its entire history, some of the most intense periods. And so state public employee workers, especially teachers and others around the state, have been organizing for many months to pressure the state government to divest from these bonds, which, you know, are being used to prop up the Israeli government, as well as to arm the IDF. That's what bonds do. They're a financial vehicle for governments to raise money when they're in a pinch, and they're not particularly profitable. So they don't serve public sector workers, but much more importantly, they run totally counter to the values of most public sector workers, in that they're being used to fund the indiscriminate bombing of Palestinian civilians, the killing of public sector workers in Gaza, teachers in Gaza, children in Gaza are being killed. And the decision of state elected and appointed officials to buy these bonds makes all public sector workers and really all Marylanders complicit in these actions. Complicit unless we stand up and do something about it and fight for divestment, which is the goal of a campaign called Break the Bonds. And so this article in Truth Out, you should check it out, is really detailing early stages of that organizing. This is the first article. They chose a really trusted and trustworthy journalist to publish it. And so this was kind of their coming out article after many months of organizing.
And then there's this one. So yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Andy. Yeah.
So what I think is interesting is Owen and I have been talking about that bond story for a little while, and we've been hearing from folks like a person that I met on Monday who's involved in that Break the Bonds campaign and was excited to hear us talk about it. And Katie, if you're on the show tonight, we're glad to have you here, and we're glad to have you join this conversation with us. But what we found really interesting was that while the state of Maryland is trying to not divest in that way, they were really happy to release this statement from the state treasurer and the comptroller about how when they got to have a vote in the state of Maryland's investment in Elon Musk's $1 trillion pay package, they wanted to underscore a commitment to responsible investment, shareholder accountability, and long-term fiscal health of the financial markets. And I just think the juxtaposition between these two things is really fascinating, because at the one hand, they're telling a bunch of state workers who don't want their money invested, their retirement money invested in genocide, that this is not the right way to do this. And at the other hand, they're grandstanding about how they denied Elon. They, took Maryland's vote and denied Elon Musk tried to deny Elon Musk his $1 trillion package.
Yeah, I think it's frankly hypocritical to say that we don't use the retirement funds and the retirement futures of public sector workers to do politics, when clearly they use it to do politics that are friendly to the Democratic Party and friendly to their national interests and their ambitions for higher office in Maryland. But on the other hand, when state workers come to them in earnest and say, hey, we don't want our pensions invested in genocide and ethnic cleansing, they say, oh, well, we don't do politics with that fund. Well, that's not politics. One, it's a bad investment, and two, it's murder and it's ethnic cleansing, and that's not political. That's international law that we're talking about. That's the values of our state, which many of our statewide elected officials are so quick to tout the Maryland values. Where in our Maryland values is bombing schools and hospitals, right? We shouldn't be involved in that. We shouldn't be subsidizing that. And this is only one of several ways in which the state of Maryland supports Israel and Israeli apartheid. And we'll get into that later in the show.
Yeah, so some key facts for this question. I think, Owen, I think your breakdown of that was excellent. I think the explanation of how the bonds are working and why this is an unethical and wrong way to use public sector employees' retirement benefits was excellent. And I want to get into these key facts about this story here. So 420,000 public sector workers whose pension and retirement funds are invested in Israel. $73.7 million is the amount of public investment in Israeli bonds for the state of Maryland. Many of them purchased as late as December of 2024. And the three most important global credit ratings agencies have all downgraded Israel's credit rating after the war and the genocide was raging on, because they realized it was a bad investment. So I think what these things say together is not only are our public sector workers being forced to subsidize this bad investment, but we don't have that much money there, and it's not gaining that much money. It's not as if it is actually helping their retirement funds grow significantly. It's probably hurting their retirement funds. But this is because the state of Maryland wants to align itself with the state of Israel, and this is a way to prove that it wants to do that.
Yeah, I think there's another piece to this, especially that 73.7 million, and with purchases late into 2024, that's really important. And that's the accountability piece. So there are people who sit on this board that oversees this. And then when they're pressured, they say, well, we don't actually make the decisions, right? People below our level staff make the decisions. And it's like, well, what's the point of an oversight board if you don't do oversight? And if there's anything that an oversight board should exist for, it's to prevent investment in genocide, right? That's not one of those like, well, this was a tough decision. We had to make a tough call. It's like, no, you invested in genocide, and you oversaw staff that consciously chose to invest in this as bombs were raining down on children in Gaza. And it is shameful, and there should be accountability at the highest levels of state government for it. And it needs to be, I think that what the Truth Out article does is it starts to move that accountability from a private small group pressure meetings, which can be effective and can be a first or early step in any organizing campaign to leverage change. What the Truth Out article does is it lays some of these facts out in a very clear and easy way to understand. And if you're listening now, you can contact your state elected officials. You can contact the governor and lieutenant governor and treasurer and controller. And if you're a union member in one of in AFSCME or MSEA, you can contact them as well and say, hey, I don't want my state, or I don't want my retirement fund, if that's your retirement fund, invested in Israel bonds.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the interesting juxtaposition with the Musk decision is they made the right decision. Like the fact that we're invested in Tesla in the first place is a thing that we should be asking about, right? But I think when presented with that decision, they made the ethical decision in that case. They made the decision, which was the state of Maryland is going to use the power of its vote to not support this. I would like to see them make the ethical decision to divest from Tesla as well. But it was like they made one very good decision that they probably drew too much attention to. And I do think that decision opens the space for this to be treated differently. And I think when people talk to them, you should be saying, why are you celebrating ethical investment in this one area that is very popular with your Democratic donors and the national narrative, but you're shirking the responsibility for it in other areas?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
And I'd want to add too, they did not make this ethical decision in a vacuum. I think early on with some of the No Kings protests or some of the protests at Tesla dealerships, I was a little bit skeptical. I said, well, what is this really going to do? What is the objective here? But clearly all those protests at Tesla dealerships and all those No Kings protests and the no oligarchy tour that Bernie and others went on, obviously it resonated on some at the level of state elected officials in Maryland. with this vote on the Elon Musk compensation package, right? And it showed that when you protest in public and when you have a general target, if there's enough attention and enough energy, that a specific policy, a constructive and specific policy objective can emerge out of that critique, even if the critique is more general. And so imagine, some of the biggest protests in recent years have been in solidarity with Palestine, and often there were specific demands, and other times just outrage and rage, and both are legitimate. And now we've seen organizers coalesce around this specific goal. And so I wonder, just like there were protests outside the Musk dealership, are there going to be protests outside the offices of elected officials who are making decisions, or overseeing staff who are making decisions to invest in Israel bonds?
Yeah, I mean, and there should be. And if you are somebody who is interested in one of those protests, then you're not finding a good outlet for it, reach out to us at ideas@gogreen2026.com, and we'll work with you to figure out how to make this happen. Because I think the point that like I say, I just think the juxtaposition of this is really important, right? Because it shows that when pressed, they understand the necessity to make ethical investments decisions, and it shows that they have the ability to do so, and that they have a platform to talk about it when they do so. And it would be great if we could see them make such a pronouncement on this issue, so that there's a statement coming out from the comptroller's office and the state government office that says we've taken this 73 point in order to better serve those 420,000 public sector workers. We've taken the $73.7 million and not only put it into a better investment, but a more ethical investment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, we are waiting on our guest to come. Oh, and it looks like she is here. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce Taylor here. So our guest tonight, I'm very excited to start off with our guest tonight, is Taylor Fraser McCollum, a proud native of Washington, D.C., who was raised in Landover, Maryland, where her journey as an activist began at a young age, including becoming the president of the District Heights Youth Empowerment Program at just 15 years old. During her college years, Taylor's political activism expanded as she took the streets of Florida to canvass for Barack Obama. But following her graduation, her dedication to progressive causes led her to join the Green Party, where she advocated for environmental justice, social equality, and social equity. And as a devoted mother, she looks forward to continuing her advocacy at the local level by working with her child's school PTA in the upcoming school year. But Taylor's activism is also deeply rooted in her local community. What we are talking about tonight is a petition Taylor launched to prevent the construction of a data center in her beloved hometown of Landover. That petition now has over 21,000 signatures, and she has her sights set on one day holding a political office. But Taylor is driven by a desire to create a more equitable and sustainable world for all. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Taylor on. I'm excited to have her here. Taylor, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. So thank you so much for coming on tonight. We're excited to have you here and to get to have this conversation. The work you're doing is really inspiring and really important for people to hear about. So thank you for coming on.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I want to get started and start asking a couple of questions. So one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later tonight is a poll that came out by the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And one of the things that it says in that poll is that a lot of people are really upset and really worried about AI, but 51% of Marylanders are worried about the environmental and energy impacts of data centers on their communities. So I wanted to throw that out there and as a number that is relevant to the work that you're doing, and get your thoughts on it. What do you think about that poll that's showing that people are worried about this?
Yes, the poll was conducted very recently, so I think that it's right on time with where we are as a society as a whole. because data center expansion is happening and exploding all across the country. So it's not just a fight in Maryland or Landover. There's fights in Arizona, in California, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, Louisiana, all across the country. So I feel like this issue is something that's very important to people. And the more they're learning about the environmental impacts of data centers, the more they are against the expansion and the footprint of data center expanding into their communities.
Yeah, and I think the poll coming out and showing that right now probably confirms what you're sensing on the ground and things like that. That a lot of people are worried about this right now, and that it is a thing that is not just a flash in the pan news story. I think people have real anxiety about what these big tech companies are trying to do to their neighborhoods.
Yes. Another major concern was surveillance, because of our proximity to DC and the existence of NDAs between data center companies and the local governments. We don't even know what type of data center is proposed for the Landover site. We know the size and the scope of the data center, but we don't know what company they're working for. So I think that's another thing that we're all concerned about, is just like, who's going to be using this data center, because of, if Palantir or one of those other type of organizations is going to be using it, I definitely don't want it in Landover. So
Right, because
it's very
it's not
unfortunate.
just the environment and the energy issues. It's what it does to the local economy. It's what it enables in terms of police surveillance and things like that. I think that's a really good point.
Mhm.
And I want to get more into some of these different angles of it in a second. But let's take a step back. Can you introduce what's happening in Landover to folks that may not be paying attention to it, and so that just set the stage for us a little bit?
Oh, sure. So way back in 2020, Larry Hogan, his motto was "We're open for business," and I think that was very unfortunate for the state as a whole, because that showed where his priorities lied. That he put profits over people every time. So he passed the legislation that basically waived the state's 6% sales and use tax for qualified data centers, and that opened the floodgates, or the doors, essentially, for data centers to want to even look at Maryland as a state of residence, or occupancy, where they would operate their business. So once he passed that legislation, the following year in 2021, you had the Prince County Council passing a legislation to fast track qualified data centers, which is CB 001 2021. So once they passed that legislation, then they got a 90-day like shovel approval, where basically like right to shovel. So as soon as they got the approval, they would be able to break ground within 90 days, basically. So it's unfortunate that that legislation was passed in 2021, but it took a few years, I guess, for the Lerner family, who is the owners of the Landover Mall site, to find a buyer that was a data center. So once they found that buyer in 2024, they proposed Bright Seat Tech Park. And this is a property that has been vacant for over 20 years. So nothing has been there, and there's no dire need in the community for something to go there. Of course, it would be nice to have amenities and things in that space, but there's no reason that a data center has to be the main thing that we provide to the community as a revenue generation stream. So they proposed that to our county planning board back in 2024, and it was approved in April of 2024. So unfortunately, the way the legislation is written, in order to appeal that approval, we would have had to act before 30 days was up. So we missed that kind of window to act on the legislation, the passing of the approval of the Bright Sea Tech Park. But what we do have working on our side is that we now have a lot of community outreach, and we're working to get more people in the community involved to speak up. So I started a petition in June of this year to help stop the data center from coming to Landover on change.org. And then about a month later, after my petition was created, I was contacted by the Party for Socialism and Liberation to do a reel on Instagram. And once we put the reel on Instagram early September, it literally took off like a wildfire. We have over 300, I think, and 50,000 views currently. And that led to 21,000 plus signatures on the petition currently. So it's really been important to meet people where they are with our campaign. And I think that social media aspect really gave us a little bit of leverage, because after we did the reel, there was a high interest in the county's qualified data center task force meetings, which is a task force that was created by the county council to kind of make a recommendation on whether or not we should move forward with data centers in
Mhm.
Prince George's County. So they had a meeting on September 8th, and hundreds of people showed up to that meeting after the reel and petition went viral. And I was very proud of the reel at that point. We held a rally before that Qualified Data Center Task Force meeting to kind of list some demands and things that we wanted to see in our community. And I believe the council and the county executive heard our voices because they put a moratorium on data center approval after that. And we basically have 6 months from September to work on strategy on how we can fully stop the Landover Mall site, as well as the county executive pausing data center approval until the end of the year. So those are two things that are working in our favor currently with the Landover site. The only thing that hinders us, or why I've said in interviews in the past that the moratorium is a bit performative, is specifically for the Landover Mall site. It was approved in 2024. So it would need to be grandfathered into the moratorium, essentially, or brought into the moratorium because it already is approved. They may have some rights to usage of the land that's already been approved. So we would have to go to court or something to get that project completely stopped. Or the county council can put legislation in to fully stop the project. So those are the options that we have on the table for now.
There's a lot there to digest. I mean, you were speaking about the, I'm going to have to rewatch this section. Sometimes I do that to make sure I'm expressing the point I want. I'm going to have to rewatch this in order to make sure I'm digesting everything that you're laying out for us. But you speak about of course, the power of community and grassroots organizing and the power of social media. But I think you also mentioned PSL, right? So it's this combination of local organizers, social media, and third-party politics, right? And the threat that a third party outside of, and in Baltimore City, where Andy and I live, and Prince George's, it's not really a two-party system. We know that it's a one-party system. I used to live in Prince George's 2005 to 2009, and it's a one-party system in these places. And so you really need a third party at the national or state level, but a second party at the county level. And so can you kind of, when Andy was saying, I'm working with somebody down in Prince George's who's doing this data center work, and then he's like, says your name, I'm like, why does that name sound familiar? So can you talk about kind of how you came to the Green Party and how you came to third party politics in general and your trajectory, before this most recent fight in which you're doing this amazing work, moving a few years back in your biography?
Oh, sure. After Obama's second term, I was highly upset. I mean, I was disappointed. All of the things that you could think of that you would be when you feel kind of bamboozled by a politician. And I know it's not 100% his responsibility to change the world, but essentially that's kind of the platform that he was running on, that we were going to get this president in and we were going to get healthcare, we were going to get, better quality of life and all of these things. And none of the things came into play in a way that was positive for us as a people as a whole. Of course, there were people who benefited under Obamacare and under Obama's policies. But when you look at different things outside of America, like nuclear disarmament or the war on terror and things like that, he kind of was on the same lines as everyone else that had come before him. So I was really disappointed. So that's when I started doing research and just kind of like looking up different articles, and that's what led me to Jill Stein and the Green Party. And I had known about the Green Party for years because in elementary school, I had a really progressive teacher, shout out to Ed Goulart, who taught us about like Ralph Nader and what was the guy's name? Oh my gosh, it's escaping me right this second. But he ran, I think, with the Green Party maybe in like the 90s. Shoot, it's gonna come back to me. But basically, like I've been learning about the Green Party for a very long time. And when Obama was elected and I voted for him and I didn't get to see the fruits of my labor canvassing and going door knocking, to make sure that this guy was in office, I felt like I needed to reach out to some other parties to see what options could be available. So that's when I really, in 2016, got involved with the Green Party. Kamisha Clark ran for Congress with the Green Party back in 2016, I believe. And I worked a lot on her campaign, canvassing for her. And we did really well as a campaign, for her not to be a career politician, getting as much of the vote as she did. I can't remember the exact percentage at this time, but it was well for what we had to work with, budget wise and everything else. So I think that we made a strong impact on the community because a lot of people were wanting to see some change and they wanted something different. So I think that we have a great opportunity now as we're moving forward with the Green Party to just grow the party as a whole. With Party for Socialism and Liberation, they are not a ballot party, a ballot access party. So I would be able to essentially run as like a Party for Socialism Liberation member and a Green Party member. So that's something that I'm looking forward to in the future, you know, bringing that kind of like socialist side of things together, because I do feel like a lot of green values are socialist values, of course. So if we just unite, then the movement will be even stronger. So that's kind of where I see it leading in the future. But I've definitely been a left-leaning, tree-hugging type of person my whole life, you know, and I feel right at home when I found the Green Party, because all of the major points that we outline about what we want to see and where we want society to go are things that align with my values.
Yeah, yeah. I'm class of 2016 here as well, so that's when I came in, and that's why I recognized your name. And so yeah, it's really great to be kind of reconnecting in this way, and just another example. There are so many that disprove the canard that, you know, Greens don't organize on local issues, or Greens don't organize for the long haul. It's like, yeah, we do. Look at Taylor. You know, we're doing the work.
Yeah.
Yep. So the next question is, what are the things people are missing about this issue, like that the media and the mainstream politicians are not talking about? Like, what is that half of the story that is never told?
I think the half that's not being told currently is like the AI bubble portion of it. You know, a lot of non-mainstream media is reporting on it, but your Fox 5 and your ABC, NBC, they're not talking about the AI bubble and how we're on the verge of it bursting, how there are zombie data centers in Loudoun County and Prince William County that don't even have the power capacity to run and operate, but they've been built and the project has been completed, and now it's just sitting there as an empty shell waiting for the juice essentially to get there. And how do we get to that juice? By returning to fossil fuels. So, you know, it's like that underbelly of like, this is not in a sustainable way. It's not being done in a sustainable way. It's kind of like something I think the media is missing. And I think that we need to spread that message a lot more. Like, in 10 to 20 years, most data centers are going to be obsolete that we currently have operating in the US. And we're at over 5,400 data centers. That's a lot of land. That's a lot of space. And then they just want them to get bigger and bigger. Louisiana, they have a project that's, I think, it's either the size of Manhattan or 3 times the size of Manhattan. It's one or the other. But it's a huge facility down in Louisiana that they're trying to build. And it just makes no sense to me that we're not thinking about the long range of it. Like, what are our children going to be experiencing in this country if there's a data center on every block that's hyperscale? You know, like the particulate matter that's getting put into the air by diesel generators is harming communities already in Memphis. They have increased asthma emergency admittance for children. And children and elderly are going to be the most susceptible to the harms of the pollution. So I think that it's important to protect them because they are the most vulnerable in our communities.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I also think the part of it that is that you and I have talked about some is the amount of fracking money from Western Pennsylvania that is going into a lot of these centers, because fracking demand for fossil fuels is going down as a bunch of renewables come onto the market. And the best way to make sure that there's continued demand for the fracked products that are coming out of Western Pennsylvania and Ohio and those places is to build these huge data centers so that the grid has all of this strain on it. And you know, it's like, I don't know that we'll ever find that Wes Moore and the Democrats have directly taken money from those fracking companies in Windsor, Pennsylvania, but they're certainly taking money from the private equity that is investing in the tech companies, and they're certainly benefiting from a product that is keeping the fracking industry alive in Western Pennsylvania right now. And I think that part of it is really interesting too. We have a fracking moratorium, or we have a fracking ban here in Maryland, but we are pumping gas through the state, and we are powering data centers in the state with the electricity that is generated with that fracked gas. And I think that the AI bubble and the continued preservation of the fracking industry are two things that are really problematic, that are united and kept together by this.
Yep, nope, I completely agree. Amazon is investing $20 billion into Pennsylvania alone, you know, to increase their infrastructure for data center capabilities. And they are on the PJM grid, which is one of the 13 states, including Maryland, DC, and Maryland and Virginia, that is on the PJM grid. So it makes no sense that we're not paying attention to what's happening in our neighboring states, because that electricity is coming from our potential electricity. Maryland, I think, is outsourcing some like 40% of its electricity right now. And if we're putting a hyperscale data center on that, they've already said that they're going to have rolling blackouts possibly in 2027. And this is coming from PJM directly, that there will be blackouts in Maryland in 2027 if we don't do something to increase our energy needs as the demand increases. The data centers that are opening in Virginia on the PJM grid, increasing our electricity costs in Maryland. So it's all tied together. And the more we see that, like, and create that unity, I think we'll have a better chance at fighting it, because people will be able to kind of like rise up against the AI and the big giants.
Yeah, totally. Owen, you got another question?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about this, and also in terms of people feeling it in their pocketbook, right? I mean, commercial utilities are at a lower rate, I think, than residential. Sometimes they, lock in a rate for a longer period of time. So if you're sitting at home and you're pissed off that your electrical bill is going up, this is one of the reasons why. Right. So how can people, and this is one of the ways in which people can become active in addressing the problem both of, land use and these, big, ugly data centers being built in, down the street from them, but also in addressing, the rising costs of electricity and the increasing or maintained dependence on fossil fuels. So Taylor, like, what can folks do to get involved? What can folks do to organize with you?
Oh, yes. Well, if you want to specifically help with the Landover fight, the first step would be to sign the petition, and sign the petition. If we don't have it linked here, I'll try to send it out to you guys. Maybe you can post it somewhere. But signing the petition really helps, because it shows that we have kind of like strength in numbers. The more people that are in opposition of it, the more likely the council members are going to be to listen to us and stopping it completely. And then I would like for people to come out to county council meetings, not just in Prince George's County, Maryland, but wherever you live. If you are fighting a data center there in Frederick County, Montgomery County, Charles County, there's so many places where they're trying to put these data centers within Maryland, and it's all going to impact your neighbor. So if you live in a county where you can speak out against a data center, I urge you to do so, because there are other people who may not have that luxury, if they're living in a part of the state where maybe there is no data center coming to that part of Maryland, but they want their voice to be heard. You can be that voice for them, because you reside in a place in close proximity to the proposed location of a data center. The next thing, go ahead.
Well, Baltimore County, Carroll County, Frederick County, that's where they're building this big, or they're proposing to build this big, high voltage electrical line to bring power from PA down through to the data center alley in Northern Virginia, right? So folks there are up in arms too. I mean, this is one of the few issues that I really see animating folks in rural Maryland, in the suburbs, in urban areas and cities, left, right, blue, red, green, yellow, like, everyone is pissed off about the cost of electricity. There are no real solutions on the table from the traditional parties, the corporate funded parties, and everyone's pissed off about the price of electricity. So I think the work that you're doing, and the petition that you're circulating, calling people to county council meetings, it really is a statewide movement that I see building around the work that you're doing.
Yes, and one last quick thing. Just found out that you can actually leave a public comment for the Maryland Public Service Commission, and they actually help to dictate when utilities will be allowed to increase their rates. So I'm encouraging everyone to go on their website and leave a public comment about how you're being impacted by the rate increases that they're allowing, and kind of getting that website out more, or getting that information out more, that you have a right to speak up to the Maryland Public Service Commission, who's in charge of kind of when and where these utilities are allowed to raise their rates. So I did want to kind of mention that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. The PSC, the Public Service Commission, is an important vehicle in determining utility policy in Maryland, whether it is water in Western Maryland or electricity in our parts of the state. it is a key vehicle that the state of Maryland uses in order to make this policy. And for the most part, my take on it is that it has been there to service the corporations first and their shareholders first. And it has been there second to take care of ratepayers and taxpayers in the state of Maryland. And when if we become the next governor and lieutenant governor, we're going to make sure that the PSC is there to serve the ratepayers and the taxpayers, and that the corporations and their shareholders are the ones that are having to beg for more money. They have record profits in Pepco and record profits in BG&E, and they are being subsidized by the state of Maryland to raise our rates. And they will say, oh, we're going to tell them they can't do that, but they're going to let them raise their rates. We're going to pay for their infrastructure. And they have been given basically a monopoly on providing electricity in the state recently. So I think the point about the PSC is really important, and it is a place where leverage is necessary. They're not, it's hard to leverage them, but if Ralph Nader taught us anything, it was to find those agencies in government that allow us to bring leverage and bring power to them and get different results out of them. And we can do that from the outside, and hopefully we can do that from the inside as well, because these things require multifaceted strategies. So
yes.
Taylor, I want to ask, so we're talking about very near-term stuff. There is a data center coming to your community, and you need to do everything you can to stop that data center. The laws have already been written. The deals have already been cut. And so you are fighting at the tail end of something that somebody should have never allowed to happen. But looking forward a little bit, we are working on what our policy is going to be as a campaign, as it relates to data centers, as it relates to AI privacy, as it relates to some of these other things. So if you could take your activist hat off a little bit and put your advocate and your policymaking hat on, what would you like to see state policy be? What can be gained or improved by changes in state policy so that future fights like yours aren't facing such an uphill battle?
Yeah, so we can start with the Renew Act, unveto it, basically make sure that legislation is back on the table. It's something that we're evaluating and taking seriously. I'm not privy to all of the details of the Renew Act, but I do know that it's legislation that affects the environment and is good for the environment. And then I would like to see possibly a full ban on hyperscale data centers, because I feel that that's just too much energy consumption, too much land use, too much water use. Like, it's just not good for our communities to have hyperscale data centers. In Prince George's County, we currently have 5 data centers open, but they're all small to mid-sized data centers, way less footprint on the environment and way less impact on the communities. So I think that if we want to see technology grow, that it's okay for AI to grow, but why does it have to be on such a massive, large scale that's going to hurt us all in not having clean water or being able to breathe because we don't have clean air? I'm someone who grew up as an asthmatic. I don't want that for my future children or grandchildren. It's very important to be able to breathe. And if your lungs are pulling in all of this from the outside, it's very hard to work to clean them from the inside. So I think that we have to focus on that when we're looking at what we want to do with data centers in our communities going forward. And then I think that we need to take the data centers that are already either like contracted or going to be built regardless, because some of these projects may be so far along in the process when you guys get in office that it's too late to kind of like say, hey, you can't do it, without them trying to take you to court. So maybe we need to make sure that the ones that are able to be open are done so sustainably, economically, and not the cheapest, easiest route, because diesel is dirty and it's the cheapest thing they could use, when we know that you can use renewable sources to power data centers, but it just costs more upfront.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about the point that you just make is that it makes very clear that you are not anti-technology. You're not even anti AI, right? But it is these billion-dollar, trillion-dollar corporations that are opening these mass-scale commercial data centers that are there, not because they're trying to help the community, but because they help the bottom line of the shareholders of those corporations, and they help them to be able to build their surveillance tools that they can then hand over to the government in order to make sure that we're all being watched. I would love to see a Maryland where we were thriving with sustainable local technology companies that were plugged into an infrastructure of local sustainable data centers so that we were able to offer a product that could compete with these big trillion-dollar corporations that are trying to rule the world. And we could say, this is how Maryland does it. Maryland isn't trying to be one place where Facebook can extract some more electricity from. We're trying to build a place that builds an alternative that is more ethical, more rooted in community, and owned by the people in the community, using data centers that are regulated like infrastructure as pieces of the democratic engine of the economy. And I love that you make that point, because I think it really stresses that this is not some regressive, like Luddite approach to the technology. It's a recognition that the technology is coming and that people in Maryland are going to use it, but it is naming the enemy as the trillion-dollar tech corporations, the private equity that is funding these data centers, the fracking companies that are benefiting from it, and the politicians who are getting the donations and the kickbacks from all of these people who are also trying to profit off of it. And I think that clarity about what the actual problem is will make this a lot more salient when we're talking to people who aren't Greens, who don't know who Ralph Nader is, who didn't vote for Jill Stein, right? Like, we need to reach a lot of people with this point. And I think that clarity that you have about what the problem is really going to help us to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening, I'm thinking, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the problem wasn't necessarily the factory, it was who owned the factory, right? And so if we can control the means of data production and own data centers, then that is part of the solution. It's about who owns data, whose data is being exploited, who has privacy and sovereignty over their data, and who's profiting from it. That's a big part of this question, I think.
Yeah, and to Michelle's point in the chat about fracking, Maryland had a choice a couple of years ago about whether to have a moratorium on fracking or a ban on fracking. And the Hogan administration led the right decision, which was a ban on fracking. And I think that sets up well the context for what we're talking about with these data centers, these mass scale, hyperscale commercial data centers that are enriching trillion-dollar companies. I think you're right. I think we should ban them. I don't think that we should come up with some fancy technocratic scheme in order to try to tax them or try to regulate them. We can do that with the smaller ones, but with the big ones that are serving these big corporations, Amazon and Plantier and all of these folks, let's just say Maryland is not open to that kind of business.
Exactly. Because it's not like a hyperscale data center is going to cure cancer. A hyperscale data center from Amazon is purely there to track your shopping habits, to track your spending habits, to market and promote items to you. It's to create, you are now the part of the product. They're tracking you, so they're not solving the mystery of life in these data centers. So I think that's very unfortunate. And Ross Perot was who I was trying to say earlier. Sorry, it came to me.
Yeah. And I mean, Ross Perot was able to get on the debate stage in those elections and make a point that resonated with a lot of Marylanders. And when we get on that debate stage next year or next year in the fall, when we force MPT to allow us and the other third-party candidates on the debate stage, it's going to change the way that this debate occurs on that stage, because they're going to ask whatever generic Republican is nominated what he feels, and they're going to ask Wes Moore what he feels, and they're both going to say it's complicated, but we need to embrace this technology and we need the jobs, and they're actually not going to be that different on what they say, because they both are taking that money from the private equity, the tech, and the fracking companies that want to see these things built, and they're both working in concert with the county politicians who also want to get that money. So when we get on that debate stage, we're going to be able to say, let me tell you the story of Taylor Fraser McCollum and how she stopped the Landover data center, and how that's the kind of leadership we need, not random Republican, whoever they nominate, and Wes Moore standing up there talking about how complicated it is. It's not actually that complicated. It's pretty straightforward. We don't want these things here. They're not good for Maryland, and we need people like you leading that fight in the meantime, so that we can get in office and we can put the ban in place. We can make sure the legislature puts the ban in place, so all of us can, I don't know, go do something else. We can go to brunch or something, right?
Yes.
No. Taylor, I think it's so great to have you here, and I would love to have you come back on the show at some point later in order to have more conversation about this, to dig deeper. I know you went into some really good trainings and you're really connecting to the national movement about this. So if you'd like, let us know. We'd love to have you come back on. And if there's anybody in the chat who would love this or would like to see us have Taylor on more, please let us know. I just love the way that you tell this story. I love the way you're leading this fight, and we're excited to have you on. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up tonight?
Oh no, just it's been a pleasure. If you want to follow the movement at PSLDC or at No Landover Data on Instagram, and thank you guys for having me, and I'll definitely be back.
Thank you, Taylor. We appreciate it. Have a good night. I know you had a busy day, multiple speaking engagements, multiple bits of activism. The life of an activist is stressful, but it is good work that you're doing. We're happy to be able to share the story with folks, and thank you for coming on, and we'll have you back soon.
Yes. All right. Well, you guys take care. Have a good night.
All right.
Bye,
Thank
Taylor.
you. All right, so I'm Owen. I'm really excited we got to do that interview. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and it was everything that I had hoped it would be. And she's just doing a great job marshaling the facts in order to fight this uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. Building coalitions, including in the typical and directly affected folks, but also bringing in new coalition members. So I love to see it. She's rad.
Yeah, it's great stuff, and I think as I said, look forward to us having a data center and digital privacy policy coming out pretty soon. I think it's important stuff for us to be talking about. And I think there's really good ways to look at this from a green futurist perspective, where we look at how do we become the way that we control the means of the tech production. How do we have cooperative technology economies that are helping Marylanders who are into this stuff and are good at this stuff without having them to go work for these evil trillion-dollar corporations or sell their labor or sell their businesses to those corporations. So I think there's a lot of space to talk about in this. We got to help Taylor win this fight first. She got to win this fight, stop that data center from coming to Landover. Then we've got to develop a policy, get on the debate stage, share those ideas, and build a movement around it. But then at the same time, I think we can be having this conversation about what does a tech economy look like in our world, where there's cooperative ownership of the means of production, where the state has a democratic stake in the way that utilities and infrastructure are regulated, and in where we are not all just there to serve the robots that the trillion-dollar tech companies want to have take our jobs and then make us work for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, that's a good segue perhaps into our next section. And I think one of the themes that will be emerging from our shows on Wednesday night, keep tuning in, is the convergence or the synergy between movement and policy and third parties and debate really being a through line between all of those, and that the absence of principled that debate from multiple perspectives outside of including those outside of the current mainstream, is really important. So our next segment, we're going to be talking about our campaign's relationship to solidarity with Palestine and our policy related to Israel-Palestine specifically, which, on first blush, some folks may not think of Maryland having a relationship with Israel or having anything to say about the struggle for Palestinian liberation. But in fact, Democrats and Republicans in Maryland have made sure that it is a state level issue. And I think, I mentioned debate before, and we know debate is a big part of your biography, Andy. I was thinking about, when I first got involved with Palestinian solidarity work, and I was thinking about, okay, maybe the first time I was at a protest outside of the Israeli embassy in DC, that must have been 2013, and, working to found and convene Baltimore Palestine Solidarity in Baltimore in 2014, some of that work. But it actually started before then. I took a class taught by a Palestinian who was the ambassador from the Palestinian Authority to the UK, and a Jewish professor who had been born in Argentina and moved to Israel Palestine. And in that class, they organized a debate, and it was really and I decided to take the side of the Palestinians in the debate, and along with kind of learning about the history of the Middle East and that region in particular, and some of my other coursework at UMD, taking the opposite side of what had been my stance for the most part up until then, growing up Jewish. That kind of is what started to lead to the paradigm shift for me. I mean, it wasn't like 2007. I took that class in 2008. I was out protesting. It took a little bit longer than that, but I really want to emphasize the importance of debate and healthy debate and well-organized debate from multiple perspectives in allowing folks to make up their own minds about these really polemical and difficult issues. And that's where I kind of start my movement towards Palestinian solidarity in that debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think it's really important to remind folks of the importance of that. And I think one of the points that we were making with Taylor, and you'll hear us make throughout the campaign, is that one of our core campaign goals is to get on the debate stage. And the reason we want to get on the debate stage is because having different perspectives, other than the things the two parties agree on, having different perspectives on that stage changes the outcome, it changes the discussion, it changes the debate. And I think your story about that is a really illustrative one about how we get there. I had up on the screen our new Israel page just dropped today on the priorities page of our website. I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat here. But you made the case, you were making the case there that Maryland is complicit in genocide. Obviously, we detail some of that here, but there's no way that anybody can read what's on this page on their screen unless they've got the biggest of TVs. So can you talk to us about some of the ways that Maryland is currently complicit with genocide?
Yeah, sure. So let's get into that policy. I think earlier we talked about a Break the Bonds campaign that's being led by Jewish Voice for Peace, specifically the DC Metro and Baltimore chapters, as well as other coalition members. And we featured an article by Jessel Noor in Truth Out. And I think, again, we're talking about the importance of debate, but we're also with Taylor and other folks talking about the value of long haul organizing. And as I was reading that article, there was a sentence which, would have seemed right at home in some of the sections of our webpage on this that you can read later, that said, Maryland has a long and close relationship. The state of Maryland has a long and close relationship with the state of Israel. And the hyperlink, I'm a dork, I follow those hyperlinks, and it went to a bill from a member of the General Assembly from about 2017 that was against BDS, that would forbid any company from doing business with the state of Maryland if it participated in some way in the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And I think, first of all, it's kind of ludicrous on its face that the state should be policing the politics of its vendors and contractors in that way. But more importantly, I contacted the journalist and I said, hey, it's true that Maryland does have that position, but it's not because the General Assembly, the People's House at the state level, passed a bill through the legislature saying that should be the law of the land. Actually, multiple years in a row, coalitions that I was a member of, Freedom to Boycott Maryland was one, defeated that bill over and over again in the General Assembly. They could not muster the support of a majority of members of the General Assembly to pass that bill. And so former Governor Hogan actually enacted it as an executive order. And in fact, Governor Moore, when he was running for office, in at least one, I think it was a J. Moore magazine interview, he pledged to steadfastly stand by that executive order of his Republican predecessor to police the politics of vendors and contractors when it came to supporting the Palestinian movement's right to live, as the first graphic that you showed said. And so we have this kind of bipartisan consensus, not down the road in Washington, D.C., when it comes to favoring Israel and favoring the value of Israeli lives over the value of Palestinian lives. It's right here in Annapolis. It's right at the governor's level. And it's so unpopular that they can't pass it through the General Assembly. So one of our policies that we're rolling out as it relates to the relationship between Maryland and the Palestinian Solidarity is that we would, if elected, cancel that executive order and say that contractors are in Maryland are Maryland is open for business when it comes to contractors who participate in BDS, right?
Right. And I mean, people will often ask, what is the first thing you're going to do? And my answer to that is usually like, realize, oh no, we're in charge now. But I think after that, I often say, like, we're going to sit down and have dinner with our friends and family. But the next thing we're going to do is repeal this executive order. It is a ridiculous piece of law. It is there. It is almost entirely symbolic, and it does not actually really stop anybody, as far as I can tell. It is just there as a virtue signal from the governance or from the state of Maryland in order to say that we want to align ourselves with Israel. So that's day one. We're repealing that. That's symbolic. Let's talk about some of the other things on here that are not about boycott, but are about divestment, and talk about the way that we can begin to get Maryland's money out of supporting Israel.
Yeah, let's get into it. So I do want to put a caveat, though. I agree it is symbolic, but the reason why civil liberties groups like the ACLU of Maryland and others who are constitutional rights groups, for that matter, opposed this anti-BDS executive order by former Governor Hogan and current Governor Wes Moore is not because of the symbolism of it, but because it chilled speech. Right now, every business owner who might ever want to contract with Maryland has to watch what they say about supporting a boycott, even in a symbolic way, of the state of Israel to end the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians. So there is a chilling effect, which moves a little bit beyond the symbolic into freedom of speech issues, which I think are really important.
I mean, I would not be surprised if the moment that we go to file our public financing claim that says that the government of Maryland owes us $800,000 because we have gotten enough people to support our campaign to be engaged in public financing, I would not be surprised if somebody tries to invoke this executive order as a means of trying to stop us from getting that money, because we're very clear that we should be able to boycott Israel, and especially boycott the illegal settlements and the West Bank. And I would not be surprised if there's somebody out there looking to try to figure out a way to say that executive order applies to our public financing. When it happens, we can play this clip back and say that we predicted it. But let's move on to the next one, the dissolving the Maryland Israel Development Center. This one has gotten a lot of attention with a lot of activist groups in the state. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this policy piece would do?
Yeah, so you mentioned that one of the folks that people associate with the Green Party, Ralph Nader, was quite adept at finding these relatively obscure bodies within government and using them as points of leverage. And so the MIDC, the Maryland Israeli Development Center, has a relatively small budget. It's a public-private partnership that seeks to promote business ties between Maryland, the free state, and the apartheid state of Israel. And so it's sort of kind of a business incubator, but it gets public dollars from the state of Maryland. And it really doesn't need to exist. Maryland shouldn't be prioritizing the growth of companies that benefit and CEOs and that benefit from apartheid in historic Palestine, that doesn't need to be part of our economy and our growth plans here in the state of Maryland.
Right. And one of the things that's most interesting to me about this is exactly that point. It is not like, but for the Maryland Israel Development Center, these businesses wouldn't exist. These businesses exist. They're capitalized. Oftentimes they're in security and defense sectors or cybersecurity sectors and things like that. And it is really Maryland not doing this because the businesses need it. It is Maryland doing it because it wants to virtue signal that it is a friend of Israel and that it is choosing sides in this conflict. You know, you mentioned Ralph Nader, and I was looking at some Ralph Nader speeches from back in 2000, and in October of 2000 he was at a press conference and they were asking him all sorts of questions about whether he was going to spoil the election and why he was doing this. But somebody said something to him that was a question that was basically like, what do you think about the ongoing conflict in Israel and Palestine? And at that point in 2000 there had been a flare up of you know, the kind of conflict that we've seen for years and years. And he said, look, you can't be an honest broker for peace if you're only friends with one side. And if Americans are only going to be friends with Israelis, then they should not say that they're trying to negotiate a peace here. They should say they're an ally and they're responsible for whatever Israel does. And I thought that statement by Ralph Nader at the time in 2000, we're not talking 2016, 2020, 2024, we're talking 25 years ago, Ralph Nader was making this an issue in that election. And I think it's one of the things that Greens have almost always broken with the two parties on. Reparations is one, education is one, Israel is one, and criminal justice is one. And I think it was helpful for me to go back and understand that this is not a thing that happened for the Green Party recently. This is the thing that has been happening for the Green Party for a long time. And I think getting rid of the Maryland Israel Development Center feels like an easy ask. It's not helping Maryland that much. It's not costing Maryland that much. But the political weight of taking a stance that says, I'm not here to be a friend of Israel, is heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So let's move on to the next one. This is one that if you're just joining us, we discussed kind of at the top of the show in our commentary on the news. And so there's over $70 million of Maryland public sector workers' retirement pensions or retirement funds that the workers are required to contribute to in some cases, and don't have a say over where those funds are invested. There's a board that oversees this. One of the members of the board is the treasurer appointed by the General Assembly, so accountable to your member of the General Assembly on some level. Other members represent the governor's interests, the comptrollers there, and then the two institutional unions also have some members on this board, and they've invested tens of millions of dollars of the Maryland Pension Fund in Israel bonds, which are low yield and, much more importantly, are totally unethical and have been used to supply the Israeli Defense Forces, the armed forces of Israel, which has been, carpet bombing Gaza and killing tens of thousands of Gazan people of late. But not just recently. We know that this ethnic cleansing goes back decades, and so divesting Maryland's pensions from genocide in Israel and elsewhere would be a top priority of an Ellis, Silverman, Andrews administration.
Absolutely. You don't need to say much more about that. It's a simple ask. We're going to move on it. Let's talk about the next one, the Port of Baltimore and the facilitations of weapon shipments.
Yeah, so ports are really important. Baltimore has one of the busiest ports on the East Coast, and there's a lot of goods that come through that port. And I think one of the interesting things that you can kind of speak to, Andy, as we were researching this, there is, and this is the thread again between the policy positions of left third party campaigns and grassroots movements for justice. So there is an ongoing block the boat campaign. It's not new. It's been years in the making. It's part of the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions is to block goods coming from Israel or owned by Israeli cargo companies. And that is it's a grassroots campaign. It's a civil disobedience campaign. But what is the role of an electoral campaign, especially at the state level, in calling for it? I mean, what can a governor do as it relates to the Port of Baltimore?
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is a really interesting question because the first instinct is going to say, when I am governor, we're going to ban weapons shipments out of the Port of Baltimore. Well, we can do that, and we're going to find ourselves in court before the ink is dry on it because federal law regulates weapons with the decision about this, and exactly in order to stop some yahoo like me from getting in the governor's office and shutting down weapons transferred to Israel. Like, this is part of the reason that there is a law in place around this, is because this has been a pressure point. And so they took the feds have taken this away from the states, so that the states cannot say, you will not ship weapons through our ports. Now, what the states can do is be a pain in the ass. They can not provide state services. They can protect workers who might strike. They can speak out against it. They can slow roll things. They can deprioritize things. There's a lot of levers of administrative power that one branch of government can use, or one level of government can use, in order to make it hard for the other level of governments to do the things that they want to do. So if we are elected, we are going to make sure that the Port of Baltimore is as hard as possible for any of the companies and any of the boats that want to ship weapons or secondary things like construction equipment and things like that to Israel. As long as Israel is maintaining an illegal apartheid, an illegal occupation, engaging in genocide and engaging in war crimes, the Port of Baltimore is going to be as difficult as it can be in order to be a place to ship weapons through, because that is not what we should be doing there. And I think a lot of that means supporting workers who might decide that they want to strike and not unload the boat, protecting them from retaliation, and making sure that we're putting whatever forces we can behind any workers or anybody else who decides that they don't want to do it. We can't directly stop the shipments. We'll find ourselves in jail and the shipments will start again if we were elected and we tried to do that. But we can raise this issue. We can raise it on the debate stage. We can raise it on live streams like this, and we can demand that Governor Moore and whatever generic Republican they choose to be able to, take a position on this, because our port is our asset. It is a public asset. It is a piece of infrastructure, and we can and should do whatever we can to make sure it's not a logistical hub for genocide.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I just want to pull on that thread a little bit as it relates to worker solidarity and organized labor. And, public sector labor law is determined at the state level. Private sector labor law, historically, since the New Deal, has been determined at the federal level. But there's a question mark hanging over the rights of workers to organize and the rights of new unions to be recognized because of Trump. I mean, Trump is an existential threat. President Trump is an existential threat to organized labor. And there are steps that states around the country, including New York, are starting to take to say, if the Trump administration does away with the ability of unions to be recognized at the federal level, then that's going to trigger at the state level the creation of a board to kind of mimic that federal level oversight and recognition. And so that's something that could happen. And there's a through line between the workers' rights and Palestinian solidarity and this block the boat, ambition, even if the governor doesn't have the power to regulate that interstate or international transit. We can certainly support movements who are doing that work. We can support workers who are doing that work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of that, let's close this out on these last two things that talk about the workers and the students at our campuses and how that is involved with Israeli universities on the one hand and the protection of dissent on the other.
Yeah, I think, Taylor was kind of talking about earlier her path towards, radicalization or kind of moving outside of the traditional parties. And I think another part of that awakening for me was, I grew up thinking that education and schools are inherently good. And I've realized that schooling and which includes universities, are part of the power structure that maintain an oppressive status quo, and we see that in cities. And Andy, you've had Devarian Baldwin on the show to talk about what that looks like in cities. But I think also the connections between Maryland universities and colleges, the military complex, and Israel are real and exist, and especially as it relates to public universities, where the governor has oversight and appoints members of the boards of trustees or the regents. That's something that we need to end, and I think that's something within the purview to end. On the flip side of that, defending the free speech of students who want to protest on campus is really, really important. We've seen a violent crackdown on protests, including at, I'm in a doc program at University of Virginia. Students there were tear gassed, and the state really cracked down. Maryland, we didn't see quite as violent a crackdown as in some other places, but the governor and the presidents of these universities and the boards were sending really hostile messages. And I think that would change if there was a governor and a lieutenant governor who stood by students' right to protest, stood by students' right to free speech. And where that free speech is most endangered now is speaking up in solidarity with Palestine.
Yep, totally. And so thank you, Owen. I really appreciate this. This deep dive into the Israel-Palestine policy that we would enact as the governor is really interesting. A lot of times people will say, well, what does the governor of Maryland have to do with Israel? Or what does the governor of Maryland have to do with Palestine? And I actually think that's the right question. I think the right question is, what is it that a governor has to do with this basically foreign policy question? But because Maryland has decided to align itself with Israel, not because it needs to, but because it wants to, in order to signal its which side it has chosen in this conflict, there is a lot of opportunity for the government in Maryland to disentangle us from Israel, from supporting Israeli genocide, from supporting Israeli apartheid and occupation, and to move us toward a respect for international law and a respect for human rights. So this is going to be a thing that we're talking about a lot in the campaign. I encourage everybody to go to the website, gogreen26.com Israel. Each of these sections that we talked about here, you can expand and see more detail, and we'll be adding pieces to this over time to document the history and the things that Owen and I were talking about at various points of this. But we really wanted to take this question on from a Maryland specific perspective and answer it with as much detail as we could in a way that actually helped people in Maryland understand the way that our government, our tax dollars, and our elected leaders are complicit with genocide, and the way that we can move to stop that. So I think this is good. Are we good you want to take a couple questions? I know we're getting to time, and we can we can have another time where we do the segment about the polls. Maybe we'll just do a whole segment about that at some other point. But you want to take a couple of these questions? One of the things we promised was we do some Q&A here.
Yeah. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer than 8:30 if folks have questions. This is why we're doing it live, is so we can deal with some questions that we got ahead of time. And if questions come in the chat, maybe we can put those on the agenda for our next show. So ask away in the chat, and I think we've got a couple questions that we got ahead of time, right, Andy?
Yeah, so we got a couple questions that we had ahead of time. People who've done more live streams than us told us not to pay too much attention to the chat while it was happening, and to get a producer or something that watched that stuff for us. We don't have that yet. If you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or go to gogreen26.com questions and go ahead and fill them out there. But we got some that we got ahead of time, so let's go ahead and get started with those. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. This question comes from Theo in Baltimore, and Theo says, how do you plan on connecting with people all across the state whose daily lives look really different depending on what unique region they live in, independent from the area's political leanings, from Southern Maryland to Baltimore City to the Appalachians to the Eastern Shore? I think this is a great question. And it's a question that we get a lot. And I get it a lot because I have spent the last couple of years traveling to all those places that Theo mentions in that question. And I think one of the things that I really realize is that there are a couple of things that unite people across the state. And that things like energy, things like cost of living, things like transit, those unite people across the state. Other things that I think are really pressing for a lot of people are the degree to which Annapolis Democrats are trying to exert control over everywhere in the state. So it's fine if you're in one of the blue counties or the suburban or urban counties that are in the core, because you have a lot of times representation in Annapolis. But everything that is outside of that, really, I think there's a lot of people in those places who feel ignored, neglected, and run roughshod over. So I think, part of the answer for me to this question is we're going to go to those places. We're going to talk to people. We're going to understand their interests, and we're going to listen and make sure that we're connecting on the issues that are important to them. The other thing is, I think we need to adopt policy positions that return decision-making to the counties. I think too often Maryland Democrats get upset that the red counties aren't agreeing with them. So they make policies that take away the decision-making power of people in counties and localities. Now, look, I'm not saying that those folks should be able to violate civil rights law or pollute at will or things like that. But we need to have some balance of power and not turn to preemption of local authority every time we don't like the decisions that people on the ground are making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, Theo, thank you for this question. And thank you for your support of the campaign and your support of the Green Party over the long haul. You're a great member of our community. Appreciate you. And I think, Andy, you spoke to it, but I've been out on the Eastern Shore twice last month. I'll be out in Western Maryland early next month. And one of the conversations I had with someone in Centerville, shout out to Centerville, was proved kind of along the lines of prove to me you're not a Democrat in disguise, right? That was the framing of the conversation. And Andy, what you were just saying about returning some decision-making power to counties and to folks in their local communities is that, that green key value of decentralization. And I think decentralization is something that sets us apart from progressives, from big government Democrats. We believe that the people closest to the problem are also the ones who are going to come up with the solution and should be empowered to do so. And that is the same for someone living in East Baltimore as someone living in Centerville or Cumberland. And so I think that decentralization is part of the answer. Also cutting across traditional party affiliations, which have become quite tribal in some ways, and talking about people's values, talking about the impact that policies have on their lives from a policies standpoint first, rather than are you blue or are you red standpoint. Once we can get past that political binary and talk about, the price of electricity is really hurting all of us, whether you live in Baltimore or Frederick or Charles County, that is what is going to help us connect with people all across the state whose lives may look different in some ways, but who are members of a working class who is being harmed by, a General Assembly members and the governor who are more accountable to donors who can cut $6,000 checks than to people who show up and vote for them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's do what we said we weren't going to do and take this question from Alan, because Alan asked it last time. And so this question here is, I brought this up last time, but how did Zohan Mamdani's win affect left-leaning parties? I think this is a great question. So we're not going to get too far into this tonight, but tomorrow night I will be doing is I will be doing a panel for Baltimore Racial Justice Action with Lawrence Grand Prix and Dottie Burt, who are, longtime Baltimore activists, and we are going to be taking on this question directly. Follow us on our social media to get the information about that panel. Tomorrow night. It'll be live in person in Baltimore, but there may be a stream of it as well. After that, I think it would be great if we could get Lawrence or Dottie to come on the show and talk more about this question of what happened with the 2025 election and why it's important, and how we can highlight it, and how we can talk about the way that it's meaningful. Beyond that, this weekend, I hope to get a newsletter article out that gets right to the heart of that question and looks at some of the things that happened in the 2025 election and what they mean for the Green Party, what they mean for the left, and what they mean for multi-party democracy. So that is a thing that we will be taking on pretty soon. I see your question there, Michelle. We're going to add that to our stack because it's not the type of thing that I have an answer to right away. So we will take that question and try to answer it next week about the injection wells. And we'll try to make sure that we give you as thorough of an answer as we can on next week's show. And we'll also try to make sure that at some time later, we make this a whole show that we can talk about.
Yeah, and Michelle, let's talk about it when I'm out in LaVale in a couple of weeks. Looking forward to that conversation.
Exactly, right. Okay, let's do at least one more of these, and then maybe it's time to wrap it up a little bit. So this question came in today from Magdalena, and the question says, Maryland sentences young Black men to the longest prison terms of any state. As governor, how would you address these extreme sentences, including life without parole? So this is a complex question. And, Maryland's criminal justice system, I think there's some really interesting scholarship that says that the two primary areas where partisan control of government doesn't yield different outcomes are criminal justice and education. And and I guess Israel probably, but every other area of political or policy decision, if Democrats are in power, one set of policies get passed. If Republicans are in power, another set of policies get passed. But that doesn't really happen with criminal justice. And so Maryland is a deep blue state with one of the largest Black caucuses in the country. And Maryland has some of the worst incarceration statistics of any state in the country. There was a pretty big win in last year's legislative session on a piece of legislation called the Second Look Act. The Second Look Act. It allowed for people who have been sentenced to long sentences to have an opportunity to be considered for release without having to go through the parole process or having to go through a lot of those different things. And it was a good piece of legislation. And I think it is a really good question that Magdalena is asking here about what do we need to do in order to build on the momentum of that victory that was years and years in the making. And so I think, we can't say it is all done right now and leave it at that. And there's a couple of pieces of legislation that will come up in this year's General Assembly that we will be highlighting and focusing on. And then in addition to that, we got to get in there and really dig in and understand the role that the governor and the executive offices play in sentencing and dealing with these problems. Because Maryland has locked too many people up for too long, for too long and for too long of a sentences, for too long an amount of time and for too long of sentences. And we have to figure out how to fix this problem. If we want the communities that have been hyper-policed and have had dozens and dozens have decades of folks removed from those communities because of tough on crime policies and sent far away and sentenced to long sentences, we've got to begin to untangle this stuff. It is absolutely essential to the safety, the health, and the well-being of our communities. And I really appreciate this question as a prompt to get us to do more work to dive into this question. So short-term answer is we're going to focus on some of the stuff that comes up in this legislative section. But second version of that is we're going to really dig into this question and make sentencing one of the areas that we focus on for the remainder of this year so that we can talk about it when the legislative session starts.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts to add on there. I mean, definitely, Andy, you're right that it was a consequential piece of legislation, and shout out to Magdalena for facilitating a coalition that was leading on on this issue. I think there's and also there were some concessions that were made, right, which happens with most bills, to pass that. And the question that I think is relevant here is, would all of those concessions have been necessary if those legislators, including, say, Luke Lippinger, the chair of Judiciary in the House, if he had a challenger, a viable challenger from the Green Party in the 46th district, would that concession have been necessary, or would he have felt heat in a different way than he does as a comfortable incumbent in a one-party town? So I think there's some praxis there related to the synergy between movements and pressure in the general election outside of primaries in dark blue or dark red parts of the state. The other part of that question, which I think, Andy, you could expand on a little bit, is Magdalena is specifically asking about young Black men, right? And so this leads me to think of also how Maryland charges young people as adults. And can you talk a little bit more about that, Andy?
Yeah, so there was a piece of legislation last year. There was a piece of legislation last year and there's been really a movement around this for a long time that would stop auto charging young people as adults for certain crimes. It doesn't prevent them from being charged as adults if a court ultimately decides to do that, but it would have stopped the auto charging based on the crime. And they were told, now is not the time. You got to come back for this sometime later. But this seems like the easiest of possible things that a state with a Democratic supermajority and Democrats in control of every major state office and control of the largest state counties at the executive level and at the prosecutor level. It seems like an easy thing to be able to get. But just yesterday, prosecutors across Maryland were gathering to say that they still want to auto charge young people as adults because they don't like the idea that they have come to believe that young people who are charged with crimes are committing adult crimes and should be charged with adults, and that they should be charged that way from the beginning. This means that Maryland has off the chart numbers of young people who are in the adult prison system. So much of an outlier on this that a lot of times when this is charted or graphed, when people are looking at the statistics of young people in the adult prison system, Maryland is such an outlier that it makes the rest of the graph hard to read in these cases. So, I mean, obviously, the General Assembly needs to do the right thing and stop auto charging people just because they were engaged in a crime. This will be a legislative fight that comes up this year. Maybe it passes this year, but it is a ridiculous outcome that it couldn't pass last year in a state where Democrats control every single major office and every local office in the states that are mostly charging and sentencing these young folks. So I think that's a really good focus, and a thing that I wanted to talk more about later is why it is that Maryland Democrats have tough on crime positions as a default instead of having legitimate approaches to dealing with public safety that put the public first. And so I think this is a great question and a topic that we're going to dive into quite a bit more.
Yeah. Who's the party of mass incarceration in Maryland?
Right. I mean, the party of mass incarceration in Maryland is very clearly the Democrats, and it has been since 1866 when they decided to end Reconstruction in the state of Maryland, and have been in charge ever since then. So, we will be talking about the 1867 Constitution a lot as well. So we are getting near the end of this show, Owen. I think it's been a really good first show. Thank you for those folks who are listening. We will follow up with folks about questions that they had in the chat. We might bring them up on later shows. Tomorrow night, as I mentioned, I will be doing a panel for Baltimore Racial Justice Action that is revisiting, that is looking at the 2024 election and its aftermath, that is looking at the 2025 election and its aftermath. This weekend, we'll get a newsletter out that talks more about some of our stances on the 2025 election. We'll probably end up scheduling a whole separate live stream deep dive to talk about the election, to get to that question that Alan was answering, and to get to the polling stuff that we had talked about. We talked about the AI part of the poll, but there's a lot of other interesting parts of it. So, thank you all so much for tuning in on this. It was our first one. I hope we did okay. We are trying this format out. We think it's good to be able to talk about news and some of those things a little bit more. So, we're going to go watch this, figure out the places where we liked it, figure out the places where we were embarrassing to ourselves, and get better. Revise, refine, and get better. So any feedback you have, please shoot our way. Before we close out, Owen, is there anything you wanna share?
Well, we talked about our campaign to get in the debates. Another part of our campaign is public financing, qualifying for public financing, which if you watched our last podcast episode, then it requires 1,500 Marylanders to donate a total of $120,000. And so if you can chip in $3, $5, $50, that'll help us towards our goal. So if you're listening and you enjoyed the show tonight and you support our campaign, or you just want to see a campaign achieve public financing in the general election so that other future campaigns are incentivized to run in a way that's accountable to Marylanders and not taxing corporations and billionaires or soon to be trillionaire, please contribute gogreen2026.com/donate and help us get there.
That's it. Excellent. I appreciate it. The donate link is in the chat. We'll make sure all of the articles, the key facts, all of the stuff that we talked about tonight is available on some platform later. Check out our socials. Look at the link tree. You can see all of our socials on there. We'll share this stuff. Thank you so much for making our first show a good one. We look forward to seeing you next week, and have a good night.
Peace.